So I saw an Undead Warrior the other day, and I was reminded once again of perhaps Activision Blizzard's greatest crime. The lack of Undead Paladins as a playable race. World of Warcraft released on November 23rd, 2004, 8,360,946 minutes ago, and every single one of those minutes could have been a minute that Undead Paladins were implemented. I think that's a perfectly reasonable statement. But hey, I'm late to the party on this. The literature on Undead Paladins has been solved. The creative director of World of Warcraft himself explained this 4 years ago. Let's see him put this issue to bed.
If undead can be priests, why can't undead be paladins?
So, the way the holy light is used between priests and paladins is slightly different, okay? So priests use it for the preservation of life, for the most part, outside of shadow priests, which don't use holy light. Paladins use it offensively, and for the preservation, but mostly offensively. So in that world, we've got their biggest enemies, undead and demons. I'm making a terrible argument for this. Actually, I don't know why they can't be paladins. We'll talk about it. How about that?
We'll talk about it. But just like when I asked my mum for a celestial steed, you never did talk about it, did you, Alex? Because it's bullshit. It's a smokescreen. It's anti-paladin propaganda meant to suppress the people who understand. The people like me. Undead Paladins are not just canonical. They lay at the heart of the undead identity. Today, I will smite down the heretics, consecrate the disinformation, and cast judgment upon the non-believers. Behold, the arbiter of discourse. I'm just kidding, of course. I would never embarrass myself in a video like that. Part 1. Undead are fucking cool.
Undead are so fucking cool. If you're going to deny me the ability to play one, you better have a good reason. Think of the iconic WoW PvP montages of history. Odds are, they were playing an undead. Clinder, Hydra, Braindeadly. At their peak, all were undead. Awesome. And Undead just have the best fan art. I actually commissioned the thumbnail for this video and I think it looks great. Riley was a joy to work with and got the commission done in a fraction of the time. And the way things panned out, the video probably doesn't get made if it wasn't for the big surge of motivation that commission gave me. So thank you, Riley. The video probably genuinely wouldn't exist without you. And what are we talking about?
Undead Paladins are the coolest fucking thing WoW could ever have, so why don't they exist? What could possibly justify their absence? Is it because undead are harmed by contact with the light? No. What? Why would you think that? You rube? You utter fool? Today, the oppression faced by Paladins shall be revealed, and Undead Paladins won't just feel possible, they will feel just. But I hear you. Choice. Surely you don't sincerely believe that an optional class in the fictional video game World of Warcraft are an oppressed group.
Part 2. Druid Privilege. To understand the dirty deal that Paladins got, we need to understand the privilege that Druids carry with them every single day. Druidism in the Warcraft universe has a rich history that stretches all the way back to the very beginning of life on Azeroth. Directly from the demigod Malorn to his son, the Forest Lord Cenarius, to people. We have an intimate knowledge of the history of Druidism, a skill that is so closely guarded that Cenarius himself is deeply involved in its teaching. And Paladins are just a bunch of virtue signaling philosophy mages who are afraid of the dark.
Do you want to know the rich history of Paladins? After the First War, a bunch of priests who got their asses kicked decided that lads among them with a gym membership should probably start bringing hammers. And that's about it. The original Paladin trainer was a priest. The whole Arthas thing goes down in the year 22, which means that at that point in time, the entire history of the Paladin Order was only about as old as the movie Shrek.
The Paladin identity was young and scrappy. There was nothing inherent to humans or dwarves that made them capable Paladins. They were just two allies who honed a skill set together. So we can expect Druids to be few in number, while the light can be accessible to seemingly anyone. Murlocs in Westfall can invoke the Holy Light.
But see, the exclusivity of Druids is represented in game, by them having one less option available to them than Paladins. Wait, what?
How has a class that was once so unencumbered become lumped in with the incredibly insular class who were once trained by a single character?
Well, I have the answer. I'm going to call this phenomenon the fragmentation of class identity in service of ergonomic gameplay outcomes at the expense of narrative cohesion, or BAD for short. Nailed it, first try.
Night Elves and Taurens share the exact same skill set, coming from the Cenarius school of Druidism. The fact that their gameplay toolkits are identical makes sense. And vanilla paladins had the same dynamic. You could be a human or dwarf paladin, and both came from the Knights of the Silver Hand, so they shared a curriculum. But uh-oh, the Burning Crusade comes out, and suddenly we have two new races who can both be paladins. The Draenei arrive as this bastion of light, almost angelic if you can look past the tentacles. So yeah, they probably don't need to be taught how to use the light. So now we have this idea that paladins have existed for thousands of years. Draenei paladins come from the Hand of Argus or the Army of the Light and have nothing to do with the Silver Hand. And then we have the Blood Elves, whose Order of Blood Knights sapped power from a captive Naru beneath Silvermoon. They have lost their faith in the light and wield it through exploitation. This is far removed from the Silver Hand, and this story beat is not a small detail. The final note of Burning Crusade's entire narrative is the Blood Knights finding the light again, but in spite of that they remain unlike their Alliance peers.
So now we have three distinct branches of light-wielding knights whose lore doesn't neatly fit together. Which, you know, the whole point of the exercise was to get new races into the hands of players, so we can be pragmatic and just call them all paladins. It's fine.
But more importantly, BC set a precedent that looks like this. 1. The light can be wielded in numerous different ways. 2. The through line is faith and piety. 3. That faith and piety can be assigned via race. The Draenei have it, the Blood Elves did not. 4. A race's relationship to the light needs to be a big deal.
So in short, we have two competing frameworks. On the one hand, fragmenting a class's identity can free it from story constraints. Paladins don't need to come from the Silver Hand. But on the other, we have this precedent that sets out a bunch of strict rules as to who and what a paladin can be.
This loosening of class identity was essential in Cataclysm's expanded roster. Why are the Night Elves now mages? The Chandrila are involved, whoever they are. Goblins can be shaman by writing up contracts with the elements. Their totems are mechanical. It's great. With Cataclysm, Druids got two new races, the Worgen, who channel a variant of Druidism that Snaris is approved of, and the Trolls, who do Druidism through their own gods, the Lower. This would seem like a massive deviation from Snaris' classical Druidism, but we're being reasonable here, so who cares? It's fine. The amount of text created to justify these combinations is kept to a minimum. Overwhelmingly, the justification is paratextual. But Rotro, what's going on with the Paladins? Cataclysm's only new Paladins, the Tauren, seem to be doing an awful lot of talking. No, stop! Stop debating the nature of the light! Stop making a big deal out of this! You're ruining the rest of this!
In truth, it doesn't really seem like it was that big a deal. Like a Tauren warrior and Druid were sitting around with their chins on their fists like, the light seems very powerful. Do you know what a strong font of light is? The fucking sun. And it turns out they were right, so good on them. All go for Tauren Paladins. With that revelation,
in 2018, allied races were introduced, significantly expanding the roster of available races, often through derivatives of existing races. For the Alliance, Lightforged Draenei and Dark Iron Dwarves were added as additional options for Paladins. I'm not interested in either of them myself, I think they're kind of boring, but they were our first new Paladins in 8 years. Zandalari Trolls were one of the races initially shown as an allied race for BFA, but they will not be released until 14 months after launch. The Zandalari have had an order of Paladins in WoW since 2012. In terms of giving the Horde a third option for Paladins, it seems like an open goal. Yet, during the BFA beta, Zandalari Trolls could not be Paladins. Why? Well, Zandalari Prelates harness their power through worshipping Razan, best known as the Lore of Kings, though he also has some unclear connection to the sun, light, and divinity. The Prelates worship Razan, and doing so grants them the ability to use the light. During the events of Zuldazar, Razan is killed. This causes the Prelates to lose their connection to the light, and rendered them unable to wield it. So the Order of Zandalari Paladins is essentially ended by this event.
this was used as justification for the absence of Zandalari Paladins. After all, the answers are all right there. Their lower died. What else needs to be said? The problem with this rationale is that all of this justification, all of this narrative, comes at the same time.
Zandalari prelates aren't real, and prior to BFA had essentially no written material. The decision on how they functioned, Razan's fate, and what would become of the prelates were all made at the same time, and in the context of an expansion whose main feature centered Zandalari as a playable race. Zandalari paladins weren't absent because Razan died. A dude in California in a t-shirt and jeans decided Zandalari paladins should not exist, and shaped the narrative to reach that conclusion. After a backlash, Zandalari paladins were among the options available to players when they launched, with the question of how they function being left to the forums. The key takeaway from all this though, the Blood Elves, the Tauren, now the Zandalari, is that paladin lore is now always made into a big deal. Any Horde paladin is radical, and also a radical notion. So while Blizzard has been able to find the fun with druids and shaman using any old nonsense to create exciting stuff, Paladins have become shackled by the need to justify their existence.
If you want to introduce a paladin that isn't one of these three, it needs to have a story behind it, delivered by characters who matter in a way that satisfies the r/Warcraft lore people. There just isn't any room for fun when it comes to paladins.
The particular obstacles to undead paladins center on how the light interacts with the undead form. The rule goes that light inherently burns undead flesh, so any interaction with the light is at best excruciating pain and at worst, re-death. Where things get hairy for the WoW nerds is that there are examples of undead utilizing the light, just not in the context of paladins. I mean, there are also undead paladins, but these are ironically kind of bad faith arguments, so don't sweat the details. Undead priests exist and have done since the game's inception. This presents a problem because Warcraft's own lore has clearly demonstrated that there was not a meaningful difference between priests and paladins. The differences as they exist today are a combination of paratextual vibing and attempts by Blizzard to create a sense of unique identity between the two.
It just leaves kind of a sour taste in your gut, doesn't it? No? Anyone?
In a section of Alex's ramblings that I cut for time, he suggests that undead paladins just feel wrong. This is an attempt at leveraging these bad vibes and sense of identity. The fact that he needs to answer this way is a testament to how flimsy the ground beneath him actually is. Now you and I, being savvy media consumers, know what's happened here. Undead holy priests don't exist because of some, fundamental difference between the way priests and paladins handle the... Undead priests exist because undead shadow priests are too cool to ignore. And that's it. Undead shadow priests, you can't not have it. Undead evil wizards, you can't leave anything on the table. Warlocks, mages, you gotta have it all. And when presented with, no other option, are you gonna bloody fragment the class and say, okay, undead priests can only use shadow spells. Ooh, here's half a class for you, dude. Or do you accept just a minor jank to have literally the coolest thing the game has? Which one would you prefer? You dickhead. They chose the smart option of accepting some minor contradiction in order to enable something cool in their video game. The correct decision. The rules are made up and can be discarded as is required, either to tell a compelling narrative or simply because they stand in the way of a good idea, like undead paladins. Part 3. So what, we should just abolish all class restrictions then? Mechanome druids.
Well, I mean... No, that's not what I'm suggesting.
When it comes to storytelling, WoW's strength has never been its narrative. It's arguably improved over time, certainly gotten more prominent. But how many times have you encountered a good story in World of Warcraft, had a craving to know what happened next? When I think about famous quests, I think of Mankirk's wife. But that quest is simple, made infamous by how little direction the player is given. The player needed to break the fourth wall and go to Thoughtbot or ask in chat. Mankirk's wife wasn't a good story, it is remembered because it became a meme in a multiplayer space. That is the context that WoW storytelling exists within. As such, the world is most often communicated through other means, through small details. Rarely do individual characters out in the world matter. They contribute to a complex tapestry of the world, of Warcraft. Let me give an example. You would agree that the Night Elves and Undead are different, right? I hope that's uncontroversial.
Do you remember how you learned that the Night Elves and Undead were different? Did you read it in a wiki? Was there a quest that specifically contrasted the two? Or was it more subtle than that? To me, the difference is clearly communicated by their homes, the way they speak, how they solve problems.
Let's contrast two vanilla quests. In Darkshore, there is a satyr corrupting the local furbolg population. Thunderous Windweaver, real name, tasks the player with using naturalist methods to cure the corruption and destroy the demon, with a minimal amount of harm to the furbolgs. In Tirisfal Glades, one of the most memorable quests revolves around the creation of a new plague. The plague is intended to be used against the Scourge, but the player is tasked by Apothecary Joanne with testing the concoction on a captured dwarf. The quest makes it clear that this kind of behaviour is pretty standard for the undead.
In both cases, the true value of these NPCs is as ambassadors for their race. Their true meaning is just to give you some small inkling as to who all these people are.
Over the span of hundreds of hours and thousands of quests, small things like this build and create a world of Warcraft. And within this tapestry of storytelling gestures, the race class combinations are huge. All core Horde races can be Warlocks, except for the Tauren. That restriction tells you something about who the Tauren are while you're still on the character creator. In vanilla, Tauren were the only Horde druids. Combine that with their visual appearance and geography, and it's clear on the character creator that the Tauren are distinct from their allies. They seem almost antithetical to the undead, who in vanilla are very much at the margins of the Horde. They're outsiders, and that was reflected in them being the only Horde race unable to be shaman, the closest thing the Horde had to a unifying identity.
These are technically restrictions, but they're character. The Horde is a loose and sometimes volatile coalition, and that is communicated clearly on the character creation screen. You've not even entered Azeroth yet, but you're asking questions that you can answer yourself without a trip to the wiki. This has meaning.
So if we're going to bend the rules of the light for our undead paladins, then it too needs to have meaning. Part 4. The nature of Undeath and LILIAN Voss.
If races have a shared character, and that character is communicated through their available class options, do undead paladins belong on this screen? Do undead paladins contribute something meaningful to the existing undead identity? Well, yeah. WoW storytelling has a lot of problems, in particular how long it takes narrative arcs to play out. By way of example, the Siege of Orgrimmar was released in late 2013, but was teased at BlizzCon as early as November of 2010. I think it's fair to say that this arc for Garrosh was conceived at least 4 years before players would see it.
In the context of the games industry, that is a long time to bear fruit, and while Garrosh is an example of a storyline followed to completion, World of Warcraft is littered with forgotten or unpopular ideas that just weren't worth returning to. Combine that with the high turnover rate of the games industry, and World of Warcraft's writing does not feel cohesive. It's like a graffiti wall. Artists co-op, modify and override each other's work, and perhaps they hurriedly leave a job unfinished. Should existing work be respected, or should it be expanded upon, tweaked, or censored? It's organic, living art. And like a graffiti wall, there is no expectation of cohesion. To me, the wall is most interesting when viewed from a distance. The drama of the package is more compelling than any one element could ever be. WoW story can never, and should never, be just one thing.
So within this madness, both the nature of WoW storytelling and the reality of its implementation, focused visions very rarely flourish. So really any strong sense of theme in WoW is worthy of attention. To survive this gauntlet means that the idea has stuck in the minds of dozens of writers over up to 16 years.
The Forsaken have a very potent recurring theme within them that I want to explore, and it is best demonstrated by the story of LILIAN Voss. LILIAN Voss was a member of the Scarlet Crusade. Through her father, LILIAN's life was devoted singularly to the destruction of all undead. That is what defined her. After her death, she is raised as an undead by the Forsaken, a fate so awful that she cannot accept it. She returns to her father, who rejects her. Rather than joining the Forsaken, LILIAN goes rogue, dismantling the Scarlet Crusade in their monastery. In Lilian's story, undeath can be seen as a metaphor for trauma and injury. For Lilian, death is not a permanent end to her existence, it is instead the most dramatic, life-altering event she could have experienced. She was changed irrecoverably by her death and subsequent resurrection. All undead are unified by this moment when they are first risen, look in the mirror, and see someone they don't recognize. This element is made pure text, with an early quest tasking the player with showing Lilian her own reflection.
LILIAN Voss did not choose to die, nor did she choose to be resurrected. She is not the same person she was the day before, through no fault of her own.
Within this context, Lilian must reconcile with what she has become, someone she once had no understanding of or pity for, and find a way to move forward. She can't go back to the way things were. She chooses to kill those who reject her new self, which is goals. She rejects the Forsaken, who are the most obvious sanctuary for her, and while this may seem paradoxical, it works within this reading of the Forsaken. LILIAN Voss has lost all sense of herself. She doesn't know who she is or what her purpose is. She throws herself entirely toward the most immediate and visceral task in front of her, and has yet to process what all of this means. At this stage, she still cannot identify with the Forsaken. As far as she is concerned, no one, not even other undead, can understand her pain. And it takes years for her to move beyond that. Though she is drafted into the Horde, she sees the opportunity to help new undead within the Horde as her greater purpose.
Lilian's undeath is analogous to the dramatic changes our bodies experience. It is a metaphor for injury that lingers and alters our anatomy. It's a car accident or diabetes.
Her story asks us how we cope with these things, how we go on living after an event like that. It's not about the event itself, but the following day, the following week, once the shock is gone and what's left is just you. There's a small detail in Tirisfal where you meet a character named Jared, accompanied by Crispin, a leper gnome. Leprosy in WoW is caused by radiation exposure for some reason. When you ask Jared why he's accompanied by a leper gnome, he says, sure, he's not been plagued in the same manner as we have, but he's clearly been plagued nonetheless. He's just as much one of us as you or I. Someone alert the guards, because I've found an ally. This is not the definitive reading of Voss's story, and it is far from a unified idea for the Forsaken, but this is a pretty basic reading of the main narrative thread of the Undead starting zone. This is what the creators felt was the story to tell to communicate who the Undead are, and that makes it a big deal. Ideas like this are peppered throughout the Forsaken, be it the collective traumas caused by Arthas and more recently Sylvanas, or numerous quests based around painful losses of loved ones. There is an undercurrent of pain and trauma to the Undead experience.
But the Undead are not a race to be pitied. Lilian Voss is not a character to be pitied. They are a group of people defined by their ability to succeed in spite of themselves. The Undead are not defined by their condition, they are defined by resilience.
Part 5. The Undead Paladin was inside me all along.
Undead Paladins are seen as a punchline by many people. Within the rules of the Warcraft universe, they are paradoxical, oxymoronic even. They were presumably once paladins who, due to physical changes in their own bodies, have lost their abilities. In our metaphor as undeath as injury, they are disabled. So let's talk about that for a bit. But we're gonna get serious, so let me ditch this garbage, but I'm keeping this. My parents always assumed that I was addicted to WoW, but I wasn't, not really. What it gave me was a really strong sense of identity. I knew who I was. I had friends and a girlfriend. I was the guy that other people pretended to be on guild applications, which if you've not tried it, amazing feeling, highly recommended. Then in 2017, I was raiding Mythic Nighthold and really struggling. I joked at the time that I was just washed up, but I suspected that it was vision related. Which, you know, is fine. Everyone cooks their eyes in front of screens nowadays, so it's just a quick trip to the optometrist for a pair of glasses and you're back at it. So I went, and it wasn't that. I was diagnosed with keratoconus in both my eyes when the cornea is bent outward and misshapen. I was warned at the time that my right eye was particularly bad and was approaching a cliff's edge, one that we coincidentally reached not long after. The cornea was so violently bent that the surface split and infection got into it, and it got really bad really fast. I ended up in the ER and took weeks to recover, during which time I couldn't leave the house, I couldn't look at a screen. Once the eye had healed over, there was a thick layer of scar tissue right in the middle, and that worsened my vision again. And then within 2 months, it split again. It was the same story. Infection, medicine, scarring, and then again, infection, medicine, scarring. At its worst, I couldn't count the fingers on my own hand through that eye. It was a year dominated by pain, uncertainty, and isolation. And it shattered my entire understanding of myself. Like, choice pro gamer, what the fuck is that, you know? Like, what was it that I even did? Like Lilian Voss, I'd become unmoored from the one thing I understood about myself. Now, thanks to Australia's public healthcare system, I was able to receive a cornea skin graft free of charge, which at the time would have cost twice our combined savings. And that was genuinely life-changing. It restored a huge amount of my vision and it stopped the corneal erosion. You know, I'm legally able to drive now, but my vision still isn't great and my eyes are extremely temperamental. You know, every red eye is a possibility of a corneal rejection or a rejection of a transplant. So every red eye is panic-inducing. The writing of this video was interrupted by a trip to the ER to deal with a stubborn red eye. And yet the thing that excites me most in life is photography and video and film. And when you're vision impaired, the idea of being a photographer can seem moronic. Like, by any measurable metric, I do not have a keen eye for detail. What could I possibly offer anyone? There are days when I'll sit down after a long day of shooting and find that I missed focus on something irreplaceable. And that really hurts. And on days like that, I feel a lot like an undead paladin. I feel absurd. I feel like a joke. And that is one image of the undead paladin. But then there's the other, of someone who is strong and resilient and won't let circumstances outside of their control define them. I know which one I'd rather be.
Lillian Voss was forced to change beyond recognition, to abandon every facet of herself as a result of her death and resurrection. Sir Zillick, the only undisputed example of an undead paladin, is trapped within his own body. His story is one of horror, a character whose condition has wholly consumed him.
These stories are tragic, but they're not the only way the story goes. Disability in reality rarely comes with the absolute destruction of the self. It does not need to be the only thing that defines you.
Within this reading of the Forsaken, the Undead Paladin snaps into sharp focus. They are analogous to every individual who has ever overcome their own body in order to accomplish something impossible. Every person who reclaimed themselves, not defined by circumstance, but by their character in the face of it. A story about triumph, rather than misery and pain. And as of today, that story is just out of reach. It's right there, withheld by the insurmountable power of a desaturation filter. And standing behind it, a bunch of made-up rules that enforce who can and cannot succeed in fiction.
So for now, I need to settle for being an undead paladin in real life. So no matter what, I pick myself and my dinky old camera back up and push myself to be the best version I can be, because in spite of it all, I am not my disability. But Alex, if I had to choose, I'd rather Undead Paladin just be in the damn game